Alrighty, let's get this show on the road. Alright, so this sort of a review, overview, whatever it's going to end up being, is not really intended per se as a portion of my high-end tactical review, but it kind of tailors onto that to a certain degree, because this was originally supposed to be my review of high-end 50mm scopes, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and I'll do a separate video on that as well. And it morphed into something else because all of a sudden I got several 50mm or close objective scopes on hand that were clearly good quality but a fair bit cheaper. So what I decided to do is first take a look at sort of what you're getting for your money, and then also do a little bit of a high-end comparison with 50mm objective scopes. Then I got a chance to have my hands on the new Z-Comp ZCO 4-20x50, but I only had it for a short amount of time, so I had to return that. And I'm going to talk about it as a sort of as a part of as a separate high-end part. The high-end part really is Z-Comp against the Tangent Theta, the 30mm tube TT315M 3-15x50, and also have an Vortex AMG 6-24x50. It's not on here. I have it upstairs. I'll do another video on this. So what do I have here on hand? Well, that's these, right? There is a Tangent Theta. Right, there's a March 3-24x52, that's this guy. There's Nightforce NX8. I didn't spend too much time with it, but enough to really carefully look at the optics, you know, touch everything. That's this guy. EOTech 5-25x50, this guy. Brownells MPO 3-18x50. It's right around $1,000, but it's a Japanese scope, so I decided to glance at it as well. That's this guy. It's very new. March 2.5-25x42 is not really a review scope. I happen to have one on hand, so I looked at it side by side with others. It's a second focal plane scope, unlike the rest of these. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I really wanted to get it in here, to get it in the picture next to the shorter scope here, the EOTech. Let me get the caps off so you get the right perspective. Okay. All right, and lastly, I've got the Crimson Trace 3-18x50. I've had it for a little bit now. I like this scope quite a bit, and I really wanted to see how it compares with other scopes in the same basic price range, right? So I'll talk a little bit about the high-end stuff, you know, 3,000, more than 3,000. I'll talk a little bit about a couple of things in the $2,000 range, the Nightforce, the EOTech. March is around $3,000, I think, and then I'll talk about the $1,000 Brownells and the Crimson Trace, which I think runs $1,500, something like that. I'd need to double check. Yeah, forgive me the humming and hawing. I'm woefully unprepared, but I'm running out of time, and I wanted to get a couple of things out there. So before I talk about optics, I want to talk a little bit about the controls. Controls are important, and controls often make a difference with different designs. I will talk a little bit about the turrets first. So on the Crimson Trace, I've got my lapel mic. I'm going to get it close to the turret. Listen to the sound. See, this sound, I don't know if you can hear it. There is a little bit of a wobble in the turret. The cleeks are widely spaced. They're very nicely tactile, but the feel is slightly flimsy, and there is a little bit of a wobble in the turret. The Brownells Precision Optic, also 3-18x50. There is a slight amount of wobble, but this is a seriously nice turret. Also on a Crimson Trace scope, note that the windage turret is exposed and non-locking. and makes a different sound. Feel is okay. On a Brownells scope, the windage is covered. So the reason I decided to look at the Brownells scope is I had a talk with a gentleman who works for Brownells, who, I guess was inspiration for this thing. He designed the reticle for this guy. I'll talk about reticles separately. This is a unusual design. The windage on this guy is covered. The guy who designed it is a PRS shooter. Nice feel, audible. Honestly, a little louder than I like, but not bad at all. But I like the fact that it's covered. On the Nightforce, it's also covered. Here's the elevation turret. It is a nice turret. The sound is muted. The feel is also a lot more muted. The clicks on an NX8 are clearly closer together than on the previous two scopes. March turrets, well, all the March turrets I've seen had good turrets. All the March scopes I've seen had good turrets. This guy is not an exception. I have nothing bad to say about these turrets. They're very nice. And keep in mind, these are the lowest profile turrets here. EOTech Vudu. The feel is a little bit muted, kind of like the NX8, but it is a locking turret, which I think is worthwhile. And the other March, well, like I said, March. So these are MOA turrets, though the other one is Milred. Okay, that March is from 2017. This one is from 2019. Turrets feel very similar. The golden standard for turrets for me is still Tangent Theta. We'll see how well it comes through in the video. In terms of the general feel of the controls, most of these are pretty good. Tangent Theta, the magnification ring is a little bit on the stiff side, but I've got a lever on it, and it's not an issue. On the Nightforce magnification ring and all the controls, the feel, so everything is really nicely calibrated. Nightforce, definitely, they know what they're doing. I like how they go about stuff. March is very good at this. Also, magnification ring is a little bit stiffer. It's not bad at all. EOTech, everything nicely calibrated. The whole eyepiece moves, right? I mean, mechanically, in terms of feel, I really don't have any complaints with the scopes. Same on the Brownells and on the Crimson Trace. The only real complaint I've got here is that the turrets on the Crimson Trace have some slop in them, which I don't like. Moving on. Physical dimensions. The reason I started looking at this is I wanted to look at scopes that are a little bit more compact, right? So my go-to scope in this category for the longest time has been the Tangent Theta, which is a 3 to 15 by 50. It's roughly the same size as a 3 to 18 by 50 Japanese scopes. NX8 is clearly smaller. March is clearly smaller. EOTech is a lot smaller. In terms of weight, March is clearly lighter. These guys are about 27 ounces. The rest, I think NX8 is 24, 26, something like that. And the rest of these guys are right around 30. It's the drive to ever shorter scopes introduces topics for people like me to talk about. I've done a couple of videos on this, but basically when you make the scope shorter, optical systems get more complicated. So I'm leery of inexpensive short scopes, and I really stay away from them. But the quality, optical quality and mechanical quality in short scopes is clearly moving down the price range. And NX8 is a very solid scope. Voodoo has been an absolute surprise for me. I expected both of these to be worse, substantially worse. given the pricing, given how short these guys are. In terms of overall optical performance of these scopes, so the two best 50mm precision type scopes I've seen to date are the Z-Comp and the Tangent Theta, all right? And the Z-Comp out-resolves it a little bit. Tangent has still a little bit better contrast and depth of field. I own the Tangent. I am not gonna sell it. This is the scope that's gonna be pried from my cold dead hand someday. But if I was starting now and I need a 25-yard focus, I'd be looking at the Z-Comp. But they are expensive, right? If I wanted a short scope, I would really strongly consider the EOTech if you can live with the reticles. This particular one has the MD3 reticle, which is their take on a general mil scale reticle. It's simple, it's nice, it works. I have no qualms in it, but the only 3 reticle they have is the Horus H59, which I don't like. There is chromatic aberration, there are some optical limitations. This is a very short scope, but it is better than I expected. And in actual use, it was really good. There are certain applications where you need a short scope using night vision and stuff like that. It takes some doing to get me to add a scope to my list of recommendations, and I'm going to add the EOTech with a condition that you have to like the reticles. In terms of image quality, I really wanted to see how EOTech and NX8 and the March will go head-to-head. March is the more expensive scope, but March was the first front focal plane scope with the 8-time aperture ratio, right, from 3 to 24. And I was really looking to see if the much less expensive NX8 can give it a run for its money, right? And no, it can't. It's nice, but it's not in the same league. It's fairly clearly not in the same league. Both of them have some focus issues at the edges that are more pronounced on the NX8. The center resolution is close. NX8 is very good and chromatic aberration is very well controlled. March is a little bit better. Color rendering is clearly better on the March. And March is not known for the best color. It's gotten a lot better since they started out, right? It started out as target scopes with a very high resolution, but it's clearly gotten better. The contrast on this latest March, I don't know if they've made design tweaks, I don't think so, is quite good and a little bit better than the one I originally tested. So the 3 to 24 by 52 March that I originally tested was the very first one in the United States, and then I haven't seen that scope for many years, and I decided to revisit it. And I like this guy. It is a crossover scope. This is very good. The question is it worth the money over the NX8, right? And another question is between the Voodoo and the NX8, is it worth it to go for the wider magnification range of the NX8 or for the shorter overall length of the EOTech Vudu? As is usually the case, I can't really answer that question for you. I am the 2.5 to 20 NX8. I'm not going to rush out and buy one. It is better than I thought it would be, but there are still limitations there that are not really my cup of tea. If I really wanted a short compact scope for my use, I would probably take the Voodoo over the NX8. But also keep in mind, I like the MD3 reticle a little bit more than the MIL-C. MIL-C has hashes that alternate between different sides of the reticle, and I don't like that. It's just a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with it, I don't like it. NX8 has significant distortion toward the edges. You can dial some of it out with a parallax, or not as much. But outside of a center 10 milliradian or so, the focus changes, there's distortion. And to me, it is distracting. It also carries over into the eyepiece design for the NX8 to a certain degree. And I found it substantially trickier to get behind than the March. Interestingly, I think, I'll look at the numbers more carefully, I think the NX8 at the same magnification has a wider field of view than the margin, and I think it is a larger eyepiece. But it is harder to get behind, right? One of the interesting corollaries of looking at scopes side by side on a tripod is that you don't have a stock to put your cheek into, so you don't get a very good measure of how it is in real life, but you get a really good comparative measure of which scope it is easier to get behind than the others. That's why I do stuff on a tripod, and I mount them on a gun and look at it. And I looked at an NX8 on a gun already. On a gun it was not too bad, but it is clearly trickier for me to line up behind it laterally. In that regard, at low magnification, it's okay. As you go higher, it's a little bit trickier. The Voodoo is substantially easier for me to get behind, and for most things that I would use this type of a scope for, I'm not sure that if going down to 2.5 power makes enough of a difference for me. If you really want to go down to lower power, yeah, I'd look at the March, I'd look at the Tangent Theta, it goes to 3 power. There is just too much distortion there for me in this NX8. That having been said, in terms of overall image quality, I like this scope. It's quite nicely done. And I have a suspicion that the 4-32x50 version is gonna have a lot fewer of these same compromises. So originally I wasn't gonna spend a ton of time on the higher magnification NX8, but now that I've looked at this guy, I kind of got my curiosity piqued. I don't like the reticles they use too much, but Mil XT is interesting, and I'm probably going to try to get my hands on the 4-32x50 NX8 and take a look. It's a little bit longer. It shouldn't have quite the same distortion issues since it doesn't go to as wide of an angle, but we'll see. For now, while this scope has exceeded my expectations were fairly low. I'm leery of high reactor ratio scopes as they go down in a lower price range. Before I move on to other scopes, one of the things to keep in mind is there's sort of a psychological thing on how do you look at a high reactor ratio scopes. To me, the way I see people talk about these is a little bit backwards. And it is backwards in a sense that, for example, it's the NX8 is 2.5 to 20x50, right? People think of it as a scope that goes up to 20 power. Oh, and by the way, I have the 2.5. The optimal use for this scope is not on 20 power. The optimal use of this scope is between 2.5 and 12. And you should treat it as a 2.5 to 12 or thereabouts scope that can also go to 20 power when you have a steady position conditions are appropriate and all that sort of stuff. With the March, which I like a little bit more, to a significant degree, it is the same basic thing. 3 to 24x52. If you go on 24, the depth of field is shallow, the exit pupil is a little bit small, and because of the large reactor ratio, it's a difficult scope to build. I view this as a 3 to 15 for general purpose use that also has a little bit more high end for those rare situations that require it. But if I'm looking for a scope that I'm going to be using at high power a lot, these are not the scopes I'm going to start my search with, because they are optimized for the broad range. And when you think broad range, assume the bottom 2/3 is where this scope really should be used most of the time, and you only go up for weird situations where you need to. The March is probably, because it's so light, it's what, 24 ounces? It's probably going to go on my hunting rifle because I like to shoot with it long range. I was going to use the AMG on it, but this guy is shorter and even lighter. And there it's going to work great. It's going to sit on 4 power most of the time if I want to do anything you normally do with a hunting rifle. But when I'm at the range practicing with it, because I like to practice, it's a 280 Remington, which is a surprisingly capable long-range caliber. When I'm at the range practicing with it, I can dial it up, I can train to read wind and do all sorts of other things with it. But my intention is not to use it all the time on high magnification. The EOTech pulls off 20 power a little bit better than NX8 does. In terms of pure image quality, I think NX8 is a little bit better. But in terms of ease of use and getting behind it, having a nice sweet spot to look at, the EOTech I think is a little bit better. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It was on a gun, it was clearly easier for me to get behind this guy, right? So if this is a scope that was going to live between 15 and 20, most of the time I need to get a compact design, I'd probably lean toward the EOTech in the $2,000 range rather than the NX8 because of the ease of use and because of the edge distortion. I've heard this argument many times that, oh, who cares about distortion? We're not taking pictures. No, but distortion is distracting. I get behind the scope, trying to settle down, focus on what I'm looking at, and if this distortion jumps out at you all the time, it's very difficult to block it out. That's just how human vision works, where we are conditioned to look at these things, and partly because we're conditioned to look at movement, and what distortion does to your eye once you're behind the scope, it looks like movement because something there's not quite right. So it's just difficult for me to focus on the center where I'm supposed to be focusing. EOTech, the Voodoo does this better. It has more chromatic aberration than NX8 does, right? And its resolution is very slightly lower in the center, but it's better toward the edges, and the eyepiece is more forgiving. So if you don't need the low magnification, Voodoo is a good option. If you want all of it, March is better. It's perfectly clear at 24 and at 3 power, but at high magnifications, it's trickier to get behind. The depth of field is shallow. That's the downside of the design. Okay. So with that out of the way, before I wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about these two, the Brownells and the Crimson Trace. They clearly look to me like related designs. Some parts of construction, the cosmetics are different, some parts of construction, when you look at them, there are certain optical characteristics that are really similar. And if that is the case, Brownells has an interesting reticle, and it's cheaper. So I'm going to spend more time with these two and see how I like them. But, if they're pulling this off, Brownells pulling this off for $1,000, I mean, in terms of image quality, these two can more or less hang with the NX8. They're bigger, magnification range. Something's beeping. Hopefully it's not going to explode. The magnification range is lower, the scope is bigger, the scope is heavier, and all this sort of stuff. But I've been playing with these Brownells, and this is surprising. It's a nice design. It's made in Japan. Both of these are made in Japan. If you look at them, the way the turret box is done, it's kind of a large ball, is about the same. You can't see it from there. Some of the cosmetics and the way assembly method is the same. The diameters of everything are the same. The specs are similar. There are some differences here, but it comes with the caps. Caps are the same. Well, they don't have to be made by the same manufacturer, but they look like they're related designs. The tube length is almost the same. Well, actually, it is the same. I don't know. These to me look like the same scopes. I'll look at it more carefully. If this is the same scope, the Brownells is cheaper, and I kind of like this reticle. I'll do some through the scope videos to see how it does. But if my basic assumption is correct, this for $1,000 may disrupt things. So now what I want to do, I want to get my hands on the Miopta Optica 6 3-18x50 and look at it side by side with these two guys and see how they stack up, because that one is cheaper, and the Optica 6 I've looked at so far has been quite good. Okay. If I were to compare these scopes, so forget the 2.5 to 25 March, it's only here for the size comparison. Assume I'm talking about tangent and these 5. In terms of ultimate resolution, which one has the best center resolution? Probably March. Okay. Then tangent, then NX8, and then these 3 are pretty close. In terms of contrast and micro contrast, ability to see fine tones, little micro details, tangent data is awesome. It's better than all these. Then March, with the NX8, this gets tricky. It doesn't do fine tonal variations really well, so it's hard to say, but I'll say these 4 are close. Brownells and the EOTech might be a little bit better. You know, they do some of the fine color variations a little bit better than others. In terms of stray light control, Tangent and March are clearly better than others, but they're $1,000 more expensive, right? So they should be. NX8 controls flare well, but I tried to play with it with a makeshift sunshade and clearly benefited from it. EOTech clearly benefits from a sunshade. Of these two, they do benefit from a sunshade, but generally flare is well controlled with these. Longer designs, simpler designs, easier to work on. Low light performance generally correlates to how we see contrast. This bloody thing is like turning on the lamp at night. March is very good. I did not like the NX8 in low light too much, and this muted contrast is probably a part of that, but it's not bad at all. These two, the Crimson Trace and Brownells, were quite good at night. I was surprised. It was sort of interesting to see. EOTech does well at night. I really like how they did illumination, but there is some flare with because EOTech is so short, it is a little bit more sensitive to off-axis light sources. So if you're going to be using it at night where there may be some other lights or whatever else, sunshade is your friend. Oh, speaking of the sunshade, so it comes with a sunshade. I almost forgot about this thing that goes in the EOTech. It works really well. So when I was mounting the EOTech on a tripod, I dropped it, which did not excite me at all. And when I dropped it, this thing came out of the sunshade, of all things. It's a piece of plastic. I already got it all scratched up. At least I think that's what it came out of. If any of you guys out there have noticed, I never paid attention, there is a flat piece of plastic in there. That will make flare worse. And some of the early testing I did with this scope was with the sunshade, with apparently this piece of, but in low light, with strange off-axis light sources, EOTech really likes to have either honeycomb or a sunshade. Okay. What else? I think that's more or less it. If you have any specific questions on these, please post in the comments. I will add some additional impressions with other scopes as I go along. I've shot with some of these already, but not with all. I haven't had the Brownell scope on a rifle yet. I am gonna continue with this, and I'm gonna do another video on the higher end scopes. I apologize. This was a little bit more discombobulated than my videos usually are, and they are fairly discombobulated as we go along, but there is really no specific theme to this other than I wanted to look at 50mm scopes. If you're looking for a specific takeaway, I would say there are 3 things. If you're going to be using a clip-on or whatever else, strongly consider EOTech if you like the reticles. If you want the best crossover scope overall for hunting and precision, a little bit of everything, in terms of overall optical performance, Tangent Theta is still it. If you like to have more magnification, March 3-24x52 is in your future. And if you want the best bang for the buck, it's early to say, but the Brownells MPO might be it. It's a nice design. It looks extremely promising for gas guns. For precision. If 18 power is enough for you, and honestly for me, it's more than enough. I shoot with a 3-15 all the time. This is worth looking at. I'm gonna test it carefully, and I'm gonna keep track on how it does as it gets out there, because that's kind of how I get an idea of reliability, basically through user experience. It's I don't know, for $1,000, this sucker is going to be is going to be very disruptive, and the reticle is interesting. Crimson trace, like the scope, to me optomechanical looks to be the same thing as Brownells. Turrets need work, and Crimson Trace did this funky thing. Let me see if I can. I doubt you will see it so easily from here, but so in the eyepiece, I doubt you can see it. I'm gonna go grab the camera and get it close. So you see there is this red line, it's an insert inside the eyepiece. And when you line up behind the scope, you see the bloody thing. This makes zero sense to me. I don't know why you'd want to do it that way. I understand that the company is called Crimson Trace, so they put a, crimson ring or something. I really don't understand why you'd want to do it that way. Anyhow, this stream of unconsciousness has carried on longer than I intended. I think it's more than half hour now. I apologize for being verbose. Thank you for watching. Thank you for spending your time with me. I do appreciate it. And if you have questions, you know where to find me. darklordofoptics.com, or leave a comment on YouTube. I'm on Gunstreamer. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Anywhere you go, if you search for Dark Lord of Optics, I'm gonna pop up. I travel a lot, so if you are somewhere where I travel, tell me where you are. If I'm in the area, I'll come buy you a beer. Thank you for watching.